If you think you already know how the story of ice and fire ends, guess again, because the winds of winter are blowing. Cersei thought of all the king's hands she had known through the years. Owen Merriweather, John Connington, Carlton Chelstead, John Arryn, Eddard Stark, her brother Tyrion, and her father, Lord Tywin Lannister. Her father most of all. All of them are burning now, she told herself, savoring the thought. They are dead and burning, every one, with all their plots and schemes and betrayals. It is my day now. It is my castle and my kingdom.
Well, that sounds like the inner monologue of an entirely rational person who's definitely not set to kill a bunch of people at all. No.
Yeah, it's very Ares-like right off the bat. So very just like, destroy my enemies with fire. I'm burning them all. It's very, very, very psychotic thoughts.
Yeah, this one's not subtle, folks. The parallels have to do with burning tons of people alive with wildfire and descending into paranoia.
Yeah, Cersei seems pretty crazy.
More than pretty crazy. She's a lot crazy, and she's ready to kill people. She's armed with wildfire. Okay, so let's set this whole thing up here. So Aegon, Fagon, Young Griff, Rhaegar's son, maybe, probably not. He intends to take King's Landing. That's pretty clear. He's beating a path up the Stormlands, and he's got his sights trained on King's Landing. Cersei's growing increasingly paranoid and delusional as the books have gone on, obviously, and she doesn't seem to care for the lives of her people very much. There's many examples of that, so she probably wouldn't mind putting them in harm's way.
She also may actively want to hurt them considering what she went through during her walk of shame. She probably has a lot of resentment for the people. And as we saw in that opening quote, she seems to like fire a lot. And since the wildfire in Blackwater Bay was her idea, that was her whole thing, she might try it again if Fagon attacks, and she'll do it with no regard for the safety of the people.
That's right. You guys may have forgotten, because Tyrion kind of got credit for it at the end. He sort of took over the wildfire project, but it was Cersei who started that whole thing. So she definitely might go back to that well, if you will. And then we've also got, the Tyrells potentially could turn against Cersei. The whole Friends in the Reach thing we'll talk about indicates there might be allies to Cersei that'll flip to Fagons. So she's in a position to be completely surrounded by enemies, and that will really tighten the screws on her paranoia.
She's also creating a lot of enemies unnecessarily. And then there's also berries on the loose and sowing chaos for various purposes.
Right, just in case Cersei isn't causing enough damage, there's Varys to make sure, assassinating the last couple people like Kevin Lannister that might have a thimbleful of sense so that Cersei can have her way with King's Landing.
No, I want completely delusional, paranoid Cersei in power.
Oh yes, no, I have a plan here. And it's Queen Cersei, Mad Queen Cersei. So, first question is, what will she do when Fagon arrives?
Right, so Fagon is on the march, right? And we know from what Quaid says to Daenerys that he is the Mummer's dragon, so he'll be cheered by the crowd. So this implies that he will successfully conquer Westeros, or at least King's Landing, and the people will love him for it. And Cersei might grow desperate as things start to close around.
Yeah, the whole Mummer's Dragon thing implies that Fagon will be successful. That's why we're talking as if, it's all but assured that Cersei is going to lose King's Landing. It's not just her bad leadership and everyone turning against her. The prophecies literally have decreed Fagon will be cheered by the crowds. So yeah, Cersei's going to grow desperate as Fagon closes in for sure. We mentioned the whole Friends in the Reach thing. It's strongly hinted that the Golden Company, they talk about having friends in the Reach, so it's strongly hinted that they've got some allies under the whole Tyrell army. Some of those houses might flip, maybe a House Tyrell, not House Tyrell, House Tarly. But as far as the Tyrells go, the only thing binding the Tyrells to Cersei is Tommen. So if something happens to Tommen, the Tyrells could turn against Cersei at the last second too, or at least flip to Fagon after Fagon takes King's Landing.
And that seems likely considering, like I said, Cersei is unnecessarily creating a lot of enemies just by being vicious and paranoid.
It's kind of what she's good at, is making enemies, turning friends against her, all that stuff.
So we know that the wildfire caches, that were like set in place by Ares are mostly cleaned up, but there's still presumably some of them that were lost and weren't cleaned up. That could be anywhere, right? So Cersei could also plant wildfire right around the city right before it's attacked, maybe, because like we said, she doesn't have any regard for the people. It'd be a callback to what Ares did, and that
Yeah, absolutely.
obviously could ignite and do a lot of damage to King's Landing. I mean, I don't even think Cersei would have a problem with like killing her own soldiers. It'd be fine for her. She doesn't care.
No, it's especially at the end. And you remember, Ares in the throne room, he gave the order once basically the battle was lost. And he was like, well, I'm going to make myself a funeral pyre and take everyone down with me. So I don't know if Cersei will do that exactly, but you definitely picture her hounded and harried, getting desperate in her last moments, giving these orders. So we'll see. She definitely is capable of killing innocents. She's capable of sacrificing her own troops, even like you're sort of saying there. Cersei, of course, has the mountain to carry out orders that nobody else would be willing to.
So she could send the mountain to she could give him an order like, go kill Fagon. And he would do his best to do it, to get to Fagon and kill him. We don't know if he'd succeed, but he'd try.
Or he could do something to set off the wildfire that would result in his death, but he's willing to do it because he's a zombie and he doesn't have quite the free will that non-zombies do. It's hard to say what state Ungregor is in, but potentially he will obey Qyburn and Cersei. So then there's question of Tommen, like I mentioned. He could die at some point in the final stages of her rule or in the sack of the city. Cersei almost gave him poison when Stannis was about to take King's Landing in the TV show, although George wrote that episode of the TV show. So it's definitely an idea that we could see again.
Okay, so let's talk about Cersei's destiny and how it's tied to wildfire. Cersei beckoned her page to another cup of wine, a golden vintage from the arbor. Fruity and rich, the queen was drinking heavily, but the wine only seemed to make her more beautiful. Her cheeks were flushed, and her eyes had a bright, feverish heat to them as she looked down over the hall. Eyes of wildfire, Sansa thought. And that's from A Clash of Kings, a Sansa chapter.
So I love that feverish heat. Like, that really, really gets the emotion across.
Yes. And Sansa directly refers to them as eyes of wildfire, which is very interesting.
Like, she's crazy. So that's interesting because basically wildfire is a metaphor for Cersei being crazy, and crazy is what you have to be to set off the wildfire. So you can see that foreshadowing right in the pupils there, and that's why I'm wearing my glasses. I'm trying to get a little wildfire in the lens. There we go. So then there's A Feast for Crows when she's actually in power. She straight up scares Jaime, and it says, Cersei says, I govern the realm. Jaime says, Seven save us all. You do. His sister liked to think of herself as Lord Tywin with Keats, but she was wrong. Their father had been as relentless and implacable as a glacier, where Cersei was all wildfire, especially when thwarted. She does not lack for wits, but she has no judgment and no patience. So that's pretty clear right there. As opposed to relentless and implacable as a glacier. So you're getting that whole fire and ice thing where the ice is like slow hatred and the fire is like that burning anger and rage. And that's also the side of the spectrum Cersei's on.
And then again, specifically the word wildfire is used here, so tying her directly to, that substance. All right, so the next quote we have is the best Mad King Aerys parallel that we have for Cersei, and it's,
Jaime knew the look in his sister's eyes. He had seen it before, most recently on the night of Tommen's wedding, when she had burned the Tower of the Hand. The green light of the wildfire had bathed the face of the watchers, so they looked like nothing so much as rotting corpses, a pack of gleeful ghouls, but some of the corpses were prettier than others. Even in the baleful glow, Cersei had been beautiful to look upon. She stood with one hand on her breast, her lips parted, her green eyes shining. She is crying, Jaime had realized, but whether it was from grief or ecstasy, he could not have said.
So that's a little disturbing. She's having some sort of ecstatic religious experience watching the burning fire. Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah, it's similar to the language almost that George R. R. Martin uses with Melisandre when she's talking about the agony and the ecstasy of the fire inside of her. And then I think it's also interesting that Jaime recognizes how beautiful that she is in the glow of the fire. It reminds me almost of Dany looking into the funeral pyre of Drogo and just kind of being mesmerized by it. I wonder if Cersei was maybe seeing something in the flame. Right, because I don't know, Danny saw things dancing in the fires. Maybe Cersei did.
Yeah, it really is like almost like a religious experience. And in fact, there is a line that matches the Danny quotes almost exactly. So the Cersei line is, it says, Cersei felt too alive for sleep. The wildfire was cleansing her, burning away all her rage and fear, filling her with resolve. The flames are so pretty. I want to watch them for a while. So compare that, cleansing, burning her, all her rage and fear. Compare that to, this is Danny walking into Drogo's pyre. It says, the flames rise before her like the women who danced at her wedding, whirling and singing and spinning their yellow and orange and crimson veils. Fearsome to behold, yet lovely, so lovely, alive with heat. Danny opened her arms to them, her skin flushed and glowing. The flames were so beautiful, the loveliest things she had ever seen. And then when she walks into the pyre, it says, she opened her arms to the fire, embraced it, and let it swallow her whole, let it cleanse her and temper her and scour her clean. She could feel her flesh sear and blacken and slough away, feel her blood boil and turn to steam, and yet there was no pain. She felt strong and new and fierce. So it's that same renewing and cleansing sort of thing going on.
All right, so the next quote we have is super interesting because it's Jaime directly comparing Cersei to Ares. And it starts off with him saying, if these flames spread beyond the tower, you may end up burning down the castle, whether you mean to or not. Wildfire is treacherous. And then Cersei goes on to say that Lord So-and-so has assured me that the pyromancers can control the fire. The Guild of Alchemists had been brewing fresh wildfire for a fortnight. Let all of King's Landing see the flames. It will be a lesson to our enemies, Cersei says. And then Jaime says, now you sound like Ares. And then her nostrils flare and she says, guard your tongue, sir. And he says, I love you too, sweet sister. But yeah, it's interesting because she's using very much Mad King Ares language. Let all of King's Landing see the flames. It'll be a lesson to our enemies. That's very Targaryen. So
Very
yeah,
much
man.
so. And then when called out on it, she's like, guard your tongue, or I'll have it out, sir, like Viserys says in the first chapter. I mean, it's just good way to prove that you're not crazy, right?
And the Mad King famously, had like Sir Ilan's tongue totally ripped out.
Yep, and that's where Viserys, probably got that language. So she sounds a lot like Ares. And there's subtle comparisons, and then there's Jaime saying, you sound like Ares, staring into this wildfire pyre that you've conjured up here. But anyways, I'm not sure what to call this other than very twisted. And here's another quote from that scene. It says, it is beautiful, she thought, as beautiful as Joffrey when they laid him in my arms. No man had ever made her feel as good as she had felt when he took her nipple in her mouth to nurse. Okay. So she's comparing this burning tower to like the birth of her child. That's weird. I mean, I don't even, like I said, it's just weird.
It's quite strange. Like you said, she's having a religious experience staring into the flames. It's quite bizarre.
So all of this kind of foreshadowing, like what's the point of it? Just to communicate that Cersei is crazy? Like, no, it's pretty clearly building towards something like what we saw on the show, where we get either a Septive Baelor explosion, which I think we will actually get that, or just general wildfire explosions in the city, civilians being sacrificed. It's pretty clear that I think something bad is coming along those lines. And that's another reason why we suspect that the TV show sequence might not be quite the same, where Danny is the only one that kind of burns King's Landing, aside from Cersei just blowing up the Septive Baelor to kill the Tyrells. In the book, we're going to have this whole battle with Fagon and Cersei with the wildfire at play. So King's Landing is going to get totally rocked at that point before Danny even gets there.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And to sum things up, Cersei is a wildfire Targaryen. Crazy, paranoid, surrounded on all sides by enemies, pushed to the edge. And she has wildfire, which the Targaryens invented once, they ran out of dragons, basically. So she likely won't die. She needs to die with Jaime, almost certainly. They need to be together because she says, it's in the book as well, where she says, we were born together, we came into the world together, we belong together, or was that just in the show? It's in the book as well, right?
I think there are lines like that in the book as well.
Yeah.
And the Valonqar prophecy, which they didn't play up in the show,
Yeah.
does indicate that her and Jaime should probably die together.
Mm-hmm. So it seems likely that after Fagon takes the city, that she'll flee to Casterly Rock, which is, would be the safest place for her, obviously. It's the Lannister stronghold. It's where she belongs, really.
And I think George has either said or given an indication that we'll see Casterly Rock, so this would be the logical way for it to happen. It's too cool of a place not to take us there. And so the cool thing about this whole scenario is that it sets up a much better analog to the Scouring of the Shire, which is what everyone was talking about with the TV show, although I didn't think that held very well. So think about this. In the TV show, it was kind of weird because the other's climax was downplayed, and it seemed like the real climax of the show was the fight against Cersei. And that's not really equivalent to the Scouring of the Shire. The Scouring of the Shire is when, while all the hobbits are in Mordor, basically defeating Sauron, Saruman, the wizard, who got his butt kicked in, the second act, slinks back to the Shire and takes over the Shire while the hobbits are away. And so after the hobbits beat Sauron, they come back to the Shire and they have to kick Saruman out. So it's this last little act, the Scouring of the Shire. There's like, the whole point of it is that like the Hobbiton was not untouched. The Shire was not untouched. It suffered too. And so the hobbits had to come back and do something. So I think the parallel here is like, if Dany goes north and with Jon, fight the battle against the others, but then after it's all done, probably Dany is, sacrifices herself at that point. Cersei slinks back to King's Landing, just like Saruman slinking back to the Shire. And then you'd have King Bran and the Starks coming back down to sort of clean out King's Landing, which is a good parallel for the Hour of the Wolf, and Cregan Stark from the Dance of the Dragons. So I think all that makes a lot of sense as a parallel, and that's what I would expect to see.
Yeah, they definitely didn't understand how it was supposed to play out in the show, and it was like kind of a weird, wonky narrative, and it makes a lot more sense that it would happen this way, for sure.
Yeah, and we've seen plenty of foreshadowing that Dany's end should be north with the others, not in a weird sort of fight with Cersei. Really feels like something they came up with because they just liked Lena Headey and wanted to play up the Cersei thing, even though she didn't really do much.
They liked her image and her presence, but they didn't really know how to like really do anything cool with her, which is like.
So she just kind of drank wine and watched Dany burn everything. But we'll be looking for that Mad Queen arc in the next book. We'll get the shotgun eye view since we're getting her POV. So we'll get to ride along with Cersei and her descent to madness and murder and mayhem. That'll be fun.
Yeah, it's exciting.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. And I guess we haven't plugged our channels at the end of every one of these. By now, if you're watching these videos, you're on both of our channels. But make sure to subscribe. Please share the videos. That really helps. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you guys so much for watching, and we hope you enjoyed this very special Friday the 13th episode of Winds of Winter Predictions. Click the link in the description to check out the full playlist.